Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to episode 30 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this episode, we'll continue on from the previous episode talking about using continuous controllers for synthesizer parameters, and we'll also start talking about a MIDI automation function called MIDI draw. Continuous controllers are a bit of a complex and long topic, so in the previous video we only used just basically faders and knobs on our MIDI controller, but continuous controllers are actually a set of 128 controls, including faders, knobs, the modulation wheel, general purpose controllers, your sustain pedal is one, expression pedals are another, even things like breath control, which is like a little headset you can wear and you can blow into it and it senses the wind speed of the air that you blow into it to control a synthesizer function. So that's pretty cool. The thing about all of these continuous controllers is they all send a common kind of range message. They all send a message between 0 and 127, 127 being the controller all the way up and 0 being the controller all the way down. With things like sustain pedal, when you press it, it's 127. When you release it, it's 0. So there is a way to automate all of these controllers without using the mix mix automation up here like we did last time, and actually using MIDI automation. So we'll get into that in just a moment. One thing I should say about continuous controllers is that in the hardware world, if you're working with a hardware synthesizer, continuous controllers have very specific functions. You know, for instance, I think controller number 74 is a brightness control. And in the software world, just because controller 74 is named brightness doesn't mean that you have to use it for brightness. So just keep in mind, in the software world, for the most part, all of your continuous controllers are basically general purpose controllers. You can use them for whatever you want. Okay, so what I've got here is just a basic musical idea. I've got a piano, some chords, and then a drummer plugin down here. On the chord track here, it says ES2 because that's the instrument we're going to use. But as you can see right now, there is no instrument on the track. So this track is not going to make any sound at the moment. So this is what I've got. And there you go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to solo the piano up here because I just want to hear the piano by itself. And first I want to show you how to get into MIDI draw. So you can either double click on the MIDI region or you can press Command 4 to open it up in its own window, which that's what I'm going to do. And you'll see all the MIDI data up here. We've already talked about how to edit MIDI data and quantize. This has all been edited and quantized. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at a window here called MIDI Draw, and you get to this by clicking on this button right here. It's called MIDI Draw. This used to be called Hyper Draw in Logic 9. So Hyper Draw and MIDI Draw are essentially the same thing. So I'm going to click on that, and what it does is it opens up an extra window down here at the bottom of the piano roll editor. And what this window does is it shows you any corresponding MIDI automation and continuous controller values associated with the notes up here. Now, typically, the first value that the first controller, if you really want to call it a controller that will show up, is note velocity. Note velocity basically just shows you the velocity of each note up here as kind of like a vertical thing here. So each one of these little dots with a line next to it is showing the velocity of that note and also the length of the note. So if I were to grab one of these and pull it down, there we go. If you grab it right on the little circle there, the little dot, and pull it down, you're actually individually controlling the velocity of the note. And you might be asking, well, what's the point of editing velocity that way when you can just use the velocity tool up here to to kind of better expedite that process? Because it's a lot faster to use the velocity tool up here than it is to mess around with this stuff here. There is one little extra control down here that you can't really do up here very well, and that is the line tool. And the line tool basically appears when you click somewhere. Actually, it's click and hold. There we go. Click and hold and drag somewhere else. You get this little green line. What this green line does is it will make all of the MIDI notes that you drag over, it'll make their velocities change to the velocity of that line that we're creating. And so we can create kind of like velocity fade-ins like this. So it's a little different from a volume fade. In volume, with the volume fade, you're just, slowly increasing the, or decreasing the output volume of the track. With MIDI velocity, we can kind of change the tone or the character of each note by increasing or decreasing the velocity, especially in these sampled instruments like the piano here, because the piano has multiple samples and a per key, that is, and the harder you hit the key, you'll actually hear a different sample, and the softer you hit the key, you can actually hear a softer sample. So that's just one thing you can do. I'm going to go ahead and not do that, so I'm just going to hit Command A up here, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but if you hold Option while using the velocity tool, you can set all of your velocities to the same value, so I'll do that. Another controller option down here is volume. Volume is just MIDI volume is all it is. So if I click somewhere on the little line here, create a breakpoint envelope here, create like a fade in, just like so, you'll see that volume fades in. And just like if we were to do this with, say, mix automation, the fader down here will actually follow that automation that we drew in. The difference from mix automation is that if I hit A to open up my automation view out here, you see nothing on the volume control. It's just because the MIDI automation is just on a different level than mix automation is. So there is a difference. At least here with volume, there's not really much of a difference. But as we'll find in just a moment, there are some things that you can do in the MIDI draw editor that you can't do up here. So you'll also see that on the track, you get these black bars. They'll actually be black or white bars depending on actually the color of your region. So, but that's basically showing you the MIDI automation that's over in the MIDI draw editor here. So I'm just gonna double click on these points here just to get rid of them. Actually, no, this is a perfect chance to show you guys a new tool here. There's two tools down at the bottom of your piano roll editor tools. One's called Automation Select, one's called Automation Curve. With Automation Select, you can take existing automation, drag over it, and you can move it around. You can also hold Option, and you can duplicate the automation. So if you want to create like a repeated effect, you can just create the automation once, and then copy and paste the automation over just by holding Option. The other tool is the Automation Curve tool, and this basically allows you to create kind of logarithmic and exponential shapes. And that's if you drag up or down, you get logarithmic and exponential. And if you drag left and right, you can actually get S-curve shapes. The other thing that you can do with Automation Select is you can drag over your automation, and you can hit delete if we don't want any automation there. All right, the next control is panorama, pan basically. Pan with all the way, basically all the way up is all the way left, all the way down is all the way right. So you can mess with pan here just like you could in the mix window out here. Actually, not the mix window, with mix automation. So I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to keep it where it's at. One control for piano here that's particularly useful is the sustain pedal, also known as a damper pedal. Sustain pedal is a little different than the other controls in that it's a switch. It's either on or it's off. And as you can see in my MIDI data up here, it's kind of, I wouldn't say staccato, but it's definitely not legato sounding. You know, what if I wanted those notes to kind of, oh, hang on, forgot to set my pan back. There we go. It's definitely not, like I said, it's definitely not staccato, but it's also not like legato. Maybe I want these notes kind of to attach to the next note. One way to do it would just be to edit the MIDI data, but if you want it to sound more like the way like a sustain pedal on a piano would work, you can actually draw in sustain pedal automation. But like I said, sustain pedal is a little different because it's essentially a switch. It's either on or it's off. So when you click in here to create automation for the sustain pedal, all the way up at 127 is on, and all the way down at 1, or actually 0, is off. And actually, you'll see on the left side here, there's a range from 0 to 127. Anything above like 64 is going to be interpreted as on, and anything below 64 is going to be interpreted as off. So what I'm going to do is over each section that I want to be sustained, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to zoom in just a bit here to see this better. For each section, it's essentially every bar that I want sustained, I'm going to make sure that it's up, just like I would be holding down the piano. And when we get to the first note of the next kind of phrase there, next bar, I'm going to very, very quickly release the pedal and then pull the pedal back up. So just click to create a point, then pull it up. Proper sustain pedaling is a little difficult if you've never played the piano before, just because there's a very specific way you're supposed to sustain, and it basically ends up being like this. When you get to the next note where you want to pedal, you quickly release and then quickly press again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of my automation select tool that I just used before to drag over that shape and then hold Option to duplicate it. So I'm just going to basically do this on every bar, just at the very beginning of each bar. It'll take a quick minute here, but when I get done, it'll sound nice and legato. Each measure will kind of blend into the next a little bit, but because of the way I'm entering in this automation here, it's not going to sound like there's a bunch of notes, overlapping. The bad way to use the sustain pedal would be to like just hold it down and then play for 30 bars before you actually let up on the pedal, because then everything's going to just sound drowned out, and you're going to have notes and different chords that don't match up and that are going to sound kind of dissonant. Here's another trick I should be using, but I'm not. If you want to copy, like once you create like 2 or 3 of these, you can actually drag over them, all 4 of them here with the automation select tool, and you can duplicate those as well as a group. I should have done that to begin with, but well, now you know. There we go. So I'm just going to delete these last 2 here. Now the only thing you want to make sure you do is you want to make sure you release the pedal one last time after all of your pedalings, because if this is like some strings or something, this note's just going to continue on forever until you basically press stop on your playback. With the piano, at least the note will actually naturally die off. With the synthesizer, it may not. So somewhere out here, I'm just going to create another off pedaling, and there we go. And what you'll see is back in the arrangement, you see these little black bars here. Once again, it's showing the MIDI automation, it's showing the sustain pedal. So let's see what this sounds like now. Yeah, that sounds really nice. So now we've got this nice kind of sustain pedaled sound without actually having to go in and edit the MIDI automation. Okay, Next, let's take a look at our ES2 track here. I don't actually have an ES2 on it yet, so let's go ahead and do that. The reason why I'm using the ES2 is because the ES2 has its own. The ES2, along with other instruments, has its own MIDI controller learning kind of built into it. So you can internally within the plugin learn a continuous controller rather than having to map it with the controller assignments window like we did in the previous window. And while we're talking about the controller assignments window, remember that's Shift Option K. And it's probably a good idea when you do this to make sure that you don't have any controls learned. What I'm going to do, just so we don't accidentally double up any controllers. So one of the things I'll say about the ES2 is that this is in no way a tutorial for the ES2. You know, you kind of have to know a little bit about what you're doing here. And a lot of this stuff I'm doing right now is kind of standardized in other synthesizers too. You know, other synths, even third-party synths, will have their own kind of MIDI controller assignment learning, you know, built into it. So what we can do in the ES2 is down on the bottom here, there's a MIDI button. You click on that. And what it does is it has its own controller assignments. It has 6 of them, Control A through F. And what you can do is click on one of these controllers, go to Learn, and then move the controller that you want to learn. And so I just moved my very first fader on my MIDI controller, which happens to be CC74, which is a brightness control like I talked about earlier. And then what you can do is you can internally within the synth say, I want controller A to control the cutoff or the resonance or the FM knob here, whatever you want it to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a preset, just so you guys can kind of follow along with me if you want to. The preset I'm going to use is under Synth Pads, and it is called Dark Pad 2. And Dark Pad 2 sounds like this. It's just a very warm synth pad. What I'm going to do is, now that I've learned my controller down here, well, I suppose I don't have to go back to macro. I can keep it on MIDI there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tweak this patch just a little bit to make it more like what I want it to sound like. First and foremost, I am going to go to the MIDI routers here, not the modulation routers here. The modulation routers essentially allow things on top here to be controlled by things on bottom or by controllers or by the XY pad. They're basically just sources and targets for MIDI, for synthesizer modulation. So what I'm going to do is just to kind of get rid of all these modulation routers is I'm going to turn them off. And the way you turn them off is just hold Option and click on the target value, and it basically turns the router off. And so I can do that across the entire set of routers here. And we'll probably end up with something that's a little more simple sounding now. Yeah, it's a little more plain now. The other thing I'm going to do is in my third envelope down here, which is hardwired to volume, which basically means that this envelope only control. Well, you can use it for other things, but it's hardwired to control volume. I'm going to pull the attack time down just a bit. I'm going to pull the release time down just a bit, so it's not so ambient sounding. There we go. And I'm also going to pull up the cutoff and the cutoff frequencies and the filters here to brighten up the sound just a bit. There we go. And actually, there's no need for me to even use filter 1 up here, so I'm just going to pull the blend down to filter 2, so I'm just using filter 2. And I'll go ahead and pull the resonance down as well. Let's pull that cutoff up a little bit more. There we go. Now we get a little more plain patch, but it's something we can work with. So the first thing we can do is we can make controller 74 just directly control, say, the cutoff up here, the cutoff for filter 2. And the way you do that is with one of your modulation routers. So what we would say is we say, okay, the target, that's what's being controlled, is going to be cutoff number 2. So it's the cutoff frequency for filter 2. And the source is what's controlling it is going to be control A, which happens to be, after we assigned it, of course, happens to be controller 74, which again is a brightness controller, but on a hardware synthesizer it would be a brightness control. But for this, it's whatever we want it to be. So the other thing we have to do is this little green arrow here is the depth of the modulation. So if we pull that all the way up, we're going to be able to hear a very drastic difference between fader down and fader up. So with fader down, the cutoff frequency is probably going to be closed. And then and the cutoff is going to be more closed. The filter is going to be more closed. And if I pull it up, it's going to be more open. So here's down. And then open right after it. I'm just going to pull the resonance down a bit, turn the fat off, and then I'm also going to make the slope a little less drastic sounding. Sometimes this works fine just doing this. What you can actually do instead is make the source max, and then make the control the via parameter. And when you make the controller, the continuous controller, be the via parameter, it lets you choose a range between basically fader down and fader up. And so the little green arrow is now fader all the way down, and the orange arrow is fader all the way up. And so you can kind of set a range now for all the way up and all the way down. And so now we get this. Yeah, basically the same effect that we got before. Now, the difference here is that now I can put something else in the source though besides max. I can put like an LFO there or an envelope, and I can make the controller, my fader, control that effect. So, for instance, if I change the source to LFO number 2. Then go over to LFO number 2, change its shape to like a square wave here, and then change its rate to something that's like a synced rate, like a synced eighth note or something like that. With the fader all the way up, we're going to hear like this sort of like filtery stutter effect. And with the fader down, you're not going to hear that effect at all. So this is the advantage of doing this way, as opposed to doing it the way we did in the previous videos. That we can not only can we just control individual controls in the synthesizer, we can control whole effects like a stutter effect or a vibrato or a filter sweep or something like that. So that's one thing that we can do here now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that effect as is. I'm going to pull the top down just a little bit so it's not so drastic. I'm going to pull the bottom up just a little bit too, so it's never at 0. And so now I have a range between this and that. And there we go. Let's go ahead and try a different shape too. Let's try the triangle wave. Maybe it'll be a little less drastic sounding. Yeah, I like that one. Okay, so now instead of having to, hit A, turn on live automation, you can actually just record in playing the keyboard and moving the control, or you can actually just play in the control on top of our pre-existing MIDI region here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the piano. I'll keep the drums in just as a timing reference, and I'm just going to play in the controller and record in the controller on top of this. All right, one quick thing to remember before we start recording in that controller automation is you want to make sure, there's actually two things you want to do. First, go to File, Project Settings, and then go to Recording. Chances are it's already set to this, but make sure your MIDI overlapping recordings is set to join when cycling. This basically means that in cycle mode, it's going to join together your MIDI regions, but when cycle mode's off, like I have it turned off now, it'll actually just overlap my automation on top of my MIDI notes there. But like I said, by default, I think by default, this is the setting, so it should be set that way already. And again, just make sure that cycle mode up here is off. You can either just click on it to turn it off or press C on the keyboard to make sure it's turned off. And the other thing you want to make sure to do is make sure that your drag mode is set to overlap, not to no overlap. If it's set to no overlap, what'll happen is everything you play will replace what you have there. And so you'll have a bunch of MIDI automation, but you'll have lost the notes that we have. So make sure you have it on overlap there. So now what I can do is just press R to record, and I can play in that controller. I'm not playing any notes. I'm just playing the controller and just layering this with MIDI automation. Now what I did there is I just, as you can see, I've got my MIDI data here, my notes, and then I have my controller data. What I'm going to do, the cool thing about this is that it's saved to a MIDI region. It's, you know, if I hit A, you're not going to see that MIDI automation like we did before. The cool thing about this is I can trim it up. I'm just going to use my marquee tool here and bar mode, and just kind of trim this up a bit. And what I'm going to do is just hold Option and duplicate this. So you actually very easily duplicate the automation because it's all contained within just the MIDI region. And then what you can do is drag over all of this, everything on the track, go to the toolbar here, this extra little toolbar by clicking here, and then choose Join, and this will join and merge the MIDI automation into the previously recorded chords there. So now what we can do, I mean, we can just hit play and we'll see that we'll hear this play. So the stutter effect gets a little harder at the top of these little peaks here, and it gets a little softer toward the bottom of these. Now, if I want to go in and further edit this, you can actually just open it up in the piano roll editor like we did before. Let me just do that so we can see the chords a little better, and we can actually find the controller down here in the controller list. So if you click here and then go to Other, you'll actually get a list of all 128 continuous controllers. The only thing we have to remember is what was the one that we actually used, and the one that we used was brightness, and you can click on that and brightness will show up. But there's actually another little trick you can do. If you click on this button right here, it'll pull up one of the controllers that you've used. Even if you use multiples, you can click on this and it'll jump back and forth and jump around between the different controllers that you've used. So that's just two different ways to get it, and you'll see here it says it's controller number 74. So, and if I press play, we can hear that automation that we drew in. And just like we did before, if we want to, we can actually take our automation select tool. You know, say we didn't really like the way this turned out. You can hit delete. And you can also just draw in your own controller automation. So you don't actually even have to play this. You don't actually have to record this in like I did if you don't want to. So maybe I'll just do something like this where I just want like a slow fade in. At least a slow fade in for the stuttering effect. And then I'll duplicate it by holding Option. Oop, that is not what I wanted to happen. Let's try that again. I'm not sure what that was. Sometimes my, there we go. Sometimes my, well, if you haven't noticed by now, sometimes my screen capture software slows down and messes up some of the things I do in Logic. There we go. So I can copy this over. Again, I'm just holding Option to duplicate. Is that it? Yeah, I think that's it. And we'll see a new shape out here. Oh, we need one more. That's okay. I'll leave it that way. So let's just hear what all this sounds like together. And there we go. So the song is a lot more interesting now that we've added that that controller information. So that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. In the next video, we'll probably continue on with MIDI in some form or fashion. I'm not really sure what direction I'm going to take it next. I know I need to do a few quantization videos to kind of further cover quantization. And we haven't talked about external instruments yet. So there's a lot of topics that I can cover from here. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks again for watching.